Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone.
So, even though we're on the brink of nuclear war, perhaps we should take a respite. This is the DMZ. Nothing happens in the DMZ. This is the demilitarized zone, so the nukes won't get dropped here. And there are a few other things, perhaps, that we should talk about. I know, as a warrior in the fight against political correctness, you are clearly agitated about what happened over at Google.
Well, we can joke. I'm really worried about this in general, about this sort of thing happening on college campuses, happening at companies. I mean, I read the memo that guy put out, and it was expressing some contrarian, politically incorrect viewpoints, things you're not supposed to talk about, whether they're right or wrong, true or false. But the fact that he was fired, that it was leaked out and that he was fired, does concern me. Remember, so I'm the guy who wrote a book sort of making fun of, Ted Nugent and the Duck Dynasty people, saying that like conservatives shouldn't be, hanging our hats on them or their support. But I also defended the Duck Dynasty guy when like A&E tried to fire him or whatever. So I'm very pro free speech, and I think it's gotten to a point now where you basically have to like toe the line, and if you step out and say something like that they deem to be inappropriate, they'll fire you. And I think that has it's illiberal, and it has the consequence of stifling like expression. So I'm very concerned about this.
Now, he described himself in his memo as a classical liberal, which is kind of nerdy conservative speak for uber free market, right?
Yeah, it's more of somebody who's like a fiscal conservative and an old-fashioned, what used to be called liberal before. Right. Yeah, so yeah, you're right.
He isn't suggesting he's a social liberal. He isn't suggesting he's some kind of moderate. He's saying he's a free market conservative.
Yeah, but I think that means he's not. So it used to be that if you were like a Bible-thumping Christian conservative who was attacking gays and using epithets, that you were in trouble, right? And everybody would be like, well, he was asking for it. He did use, a word that we don't think is appropriate, and he's got a Southern accent, and and he's not woke. He's not down with the gay rights cause or whatever. Now you could be like a pretty like cosmopolitan young guy working in the tech sector. You could start your memo off by saying, I support diversity and women in the workplace and all that, and you're still in trouble.
But my point about him being a classical liberal and being a believer in the free market, I would assume he supports the right for employers to hire and fire at will. Their employers can decide how they want their company culture to be. Right?
I think Google can fire him, but then they also invite criticism for doing that, and I have the right to do that.
Sure.
And I also think you can't go around saying that you're like this open-minded, like, liberal, like open-minded, hey man, we encourage diverse viewpoints and ideas and there are no bad ideas. You can't like have that image and also have this like authoritarian, attitude and Bill, before I forget, the other thing that really bothered me about this story isn't Google. It's the way, and I should say, Connor Friedersdorf, who is does Blogging Heads pretty regularly, like wrote a piece at The Atlantic, much more eloquent than I'll be here, and he's really probably the best guy. I hope he talks about this too in this venue. But the media's portrayal of it. I was watching TV. I was in New York, just watching TV all day, like cable news all day. And they would never quote from the memo. It was all paraphrasing, and they called it like an anti-woman, women don't belong in tech. I mean, he never said that. So they were mischaracterizing it in the media, which is like a separate problem, but it bothered me.
Right. I agree that oversimplifications, but I want to drill on this point. If you're going to be a free market conservative, this is probably not a guy who loves unions. I mean, I'm presuming here, based on his definition of classical liberal, he probably doesn't want a situation where it's hard for employers to fire people they think are not contributing to the workplace properly. You have to be cognizant of the fact that we have free speech. You can't get put in jail for your opinions. You can't be fined by the government for your opinions. Yet, to be accepted in the workplace, you have to follow the rules, written or unwritten.
But wasn't this okay? I will gladly concede that, and I think he would probably agree. I don't know this dude, but I assume he would agree that, like, people can fire you. But this was, I think, ostensibly like an era, a place that was welcoming of input, and that this leaked out. Like, I don't think he made this go public. I think someone else put this memo out, and it's. I'm not saying it may or may not be illegal. I don't know. I would encourage. I think that they should be able to fire him. But I also think that it really, this is a continuation of what we're seeing on college campuses, where basically, like, you have to hold these very progressive viewpoints and dare not challenge them even or question them, or else you'll be fired. That seems very heavy-handed to me.
Well, if I was the Google CEO, I don't think I would handle it in this way. I think I would have had more internal conversation with him, with others in the workplace. I mean, the issue here, from Google's perspective, as best I can understand, is he made it very difficult to work alongside other women in the business. I mean, he had some I believe in diversity, but he had other lines suggesting there's inherent attributes.
See, this is where I think.
Right, you characterize.
This is where I think it's political correctness run amok, and I feel like, I'll speak for myself, my brand, because I know that I don't represent all of conservatives, but I think I'm like really open-minded. Like, I like different ideas. If someone, you're trans, great, cool. I would work with you. What do I care? Like, liberals seem to be, and I say liberals, the left is probably a better characterization, seem to be the one who, like, if you're not on board with the agenda, then I can't work with you. I'm made to feel uncomfortable. Well, what if I said gay marriage makes me feel uncomfortable, so I'm not going to work with someone. Like, I'd be drummed out of polite society. I'd probably be fired. I mean, I couldn't do that, nor should I. Like, I don't think that's the way we ought to be, but I feel uncomfortable. Here's something he said in the memo, and I would encourage everyone to actually read the memo because it's been mischaracterized by TV. But here's one of the things he said about women. He said that men, for whatever reason, and maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, I don't know, but I don't think it's controversial to say this or to hypothesize this. He said that men want status. Men have this desire for status, and that leads them maybe to take bad jobs, to put their kids and family second, to work themselves harder because they want this status. And he's arguing, again, I don't know if it's right or wrong, he's arguing that maybe women actually have their priorities more in order. Maybe they don't crave the status for the sake of status as much. Maybe they want a better work-life balance. And therefore, it stands to reason, if you buy that premise, that there would be a disproportionate number of men at the upper echelons of companies like Google. That's one of the things he says. Like, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but I think we should be able to have that discussion. Like, I don't think we should That doesn't make you a misogynist.
I want to quote someone fully. I'm looking
that.
at the memo right now.
Okay. You'd be the first person to actually quote the memo, by the way.
So he says, for instance, on average, men and women biologically differ in many ways. These differences aren't just socially constructed. Give some bullet points. Note, I'm not saying that all men differ from women in the following ways or that these differences are just, quote unquote. I'm simply stating that the distribution of preferences and abilities of men and women differ in part due to biological causes, and that these differences may explain why we don't see equal representation of women in tech and leadership. Many of these differences are small, and there's significant overlap between men and women. So you can't say anything about an individual given these population level distributions. Then he has a header saying personality differences. Women, on average, have more bullet. Openness directed towards feelings and aesthetics rather than ideas. Women generally also have a stronger interest in people rather than things relative to men, also interpreted as empathizing versus systemizing. Bullet. These two differences in part explain why women relatively prefer jobs in social or artistic areas. More men may like coding because it requires systemizing, and even within SWEs, comparatively more women work on front end, which deals with both people and aesthetics. Bullet. Extroversion expressed as gregariousness rather than assertiveness, also higher agreeableness. Bullet. This leads to women generally having a harder time negotiating salary, asking for raises, speaking up, and leading. Note that these are just average differences, and there's overlap between men and women.
Yeah. And you know who would agree with that? Mika Brzezinski, who wrote a whole book about knowing your worth and about how women don't demand
there's one more bullet,
pay as much as men.
One more bullet I want to...
That's who would agree with that, Mika Brzezinski.
Neuroticism. Women on average have more neuroticism, higher anxiety, lower stress tolerance. This may contribute to the higher levels of anxiety women report on Google lists and to the lower number of women in high-stress jobs. Sure, I'm sure you can find a lot of women, maybe Mika agrees with that or not, I don't know. I'm sure he's not the only person who believes these things, but they are... So the point I want to make, so if you want to say, look, other people believe these things, he should be able to keep his job. You can have that point of view. He sent this out far and wide in his company. I don't really know why he felt like this was important.
Well, see, actually, this is a great question. Is this... So it may be that Google encourages this sort of...
Not anymore.
Discussion and debate. Well, it may be that they used to pretend that they did, and that they made available like an intranet for people to raise ideas, and or it may be that this was a weird why did this guy write a 20-page memo in randomly? I would be interested to know that. My guess is that there was some sort of an infrastructure that encouraged people to write things like this, rather than the fact that he took it upon himself to just write this random. I think that would make a difference.
I'm a kind of person that doesn't like working with other people. I prefer to work out of the house. I have minimal interactions with other human beings. I have not worked in an office. I've worked with organizations, but I haven't worked in an office for over 10 years. But I've done it. And
it sucks.
Part of being employed in an office is getting along with the people you work with. If someone is constantly, and I can't speak for everything about the situation, if you're constantly causing social problems in your office, you are not likely to keep your job. I don't know.
Does he have a pattern of this? I don't.
I do know if someone was sending out missives where you're painting broad brushes. I know he's trying to say, well, I'm just saying on average. I'm not saying every individual. You're still making some very generalist characterizations of things that are going to be, at minimum, highly controversial. And you got to expect someone's going to take advantage of saying, hey, your class of gender has higher neuroticism on average. Someone's not going to take kindly to that, and you have to work with those people.
I don't know. I don't know if that may be true. I don't know. There could be documentation to back. I don't know if there were footnotes. But my point is that it used to be that you would have to like be a dick
this
to
is,
get fucked. Like you would have to be
a high
like,
class dick right here. This is a dick
you,
move. Saying this memo is a dick move. Period.
No. It used to be you would have to be the kind of guy that would be like, women don't belong in the workplace. This is a guy who wrote a very ironic, very caveated and cautious memo that says, I'm not saying that all women, or even, I'm saying that on average, generally speaking, such and such is likely the case, and that probably explains. I mean, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, but the idea that you could write something that's utterly defensible and couched in so much weasel language, to be frank, would get you fired is a scary.
I mean, but what you're saying is being very couched and very nuanced and careful. I think to others comes across as highly passive aggressive and thinly cloaked.
Let me ask you this, Bill. Do you believe, because it may be, I think a lot of liberals believe this, do you believe that men and women are exactly alike, except that we have these that we have culturally programmed them? So that, like, I can just tell you personally, my little boys, I would have I would buy them dolls if they wanted dolls, but they make guns out of sticks and they want to kill things. Like, well, they are very different. That's my anecdotal
this is
observation.
A separate discussion. Like, my girls are, super into princesses and really dislike guns, and we are not a family that was like pushing princesses on them. They gravitated towards it. And my personal observation, this is not an academic study, it's not that we're biologically programmed to do that. It's that there's so much culture in the air. I know there is academic research about gender identity that really manifests around the age of 3. And this is true not just for traditional gender patterns, but transgender identity that tends to manifest around 3. And my understanding of it is, you see what's around you. You see when you walk down the street that there are people who are not wearing dresses and people that are, and you wonder, why is that? What's going on here? How do I fit into all this? I mean, I had my 3-year-old tell me that girls can't be astronauts out of the blue. So not for anything I said or what my wife said. She just, we read books. Right. She sees stuff in books. She sees the astronauts in the books are men. She makes that connection herself.
See, I think this is probably a fundamental difference, is that you believe, and I'm guessing more people at Google, like, you believe that most of the differences are cultural. And I believe that there are very deep, just sort of ingrained preferences, on average, not always, but that I think that it's possible that men would be more interested and driven toward coding, and it's possible that women would be less, and that would not be a product of our culture or exposure or the environment, but that could be just something innate about them, that there could be innate differences. And what bothers me is that saying that
you're
could get you in trouble.
I'll just take as a given, I mean, obviously there are biological differences between men and women. That in of itself is not a controversial point. Where it's controversial, where it gets controversial is that what's the meaning of that in modern society? How much do we prevent people opportunities based on biological differences? And he is making an argument that let's not go overboard trying to help women become coders if they're not biologically inclined to be coders. We should have women in the workplace. We should have racial diversity. I'm not saying that women shouldn't be allowed to be coders, but let's not go nuts and try to make this 50-50 when their inclinations going different ways. If that's not the creed of the company you work for, and it's not the creed of the women that you work with and the men that you work with, and you're going to push this point in the most confrontational way possible, that...
that's not the most controversial. This was a very...
top 5 possible confrontational ways, mass company memo.
The mission statement. But let me say... I would say a couple things before they escape my mind, and I think they both have. One point would be this. I've heard plenty of people say, plenty of like CEOs and stuff, like say like I only hire women because they're better than men. They're better communicators than men. And like I don't think you can get fired for saying that. I think you could say that about women. I mean, like. I've heard that like women are better divers than men because they can handle the cold water, like diving for, whatever, clams or like what. My point is, like, I feel like you could say that women are better at certain things, and they are. I think they probably are. They're different because I think men and women are different. Women are probably better, and I don't think it's say who the hell wants to be a coder? Like, is that the highest like achievement of life? Like there's a lot of things that I think are probably more important to contribute to society than being a coder at this point too. So like why is that the ultimate evil? And then the last thing I would say is I think that if you work for, I don't know the culture of Google. I never worked at Google, and I don't know if this was like an abnormal thing to write this memo or if it was encouraged, but my guess is that they spout this sort of bullshit that says like, this is your company. This is your Google. We want to hear from you. If there's any way that we can improve to be more efficient or areas to reduce redundancy, see something, say something. We want to hear from you. This is your company. Like if they are saying that, if they are encouraging you to not just be a worker bee, to not just do what you're told, but to like help them make this your company, then you write the memo, right? You think that you're helping them. And you've been invited to help them.
Well, let's shift on to more.
Sound off in the comment section.
So outside of Trump's war of manhood with Kim Jong-un, he's also taking a good part of his vacation to attack Mitch McConnell for not getting health care passed, and he's basically threatening him that if he can't repeal Obamacare, if he can't get tax reform passed, if he can't get infrastructure passed, maybe he should quit. But while he's done that, he also endorsed in the Alabama special election primary, which is this coming Tuesday, the incumbent interim Senator Luther Strange, who is backed by McConnell and McConnell's affiliated super PAC. And there are 2 other Republicans running Alabama. One is Congressman Mo Brooks. The other is the former Judge Roy Moore, who you might remember has had many battles about displaying the 10 Commandments in the courtroom. He lost his job at one point over that, but then he regained his judicial seat later. Then he got suspended for not implementing same-sex marriage after the Supreme Court ruling. Both Moore and Brooks are running on a drain the swamp message, calling Strange a part of the awful establishment led by Mitch McConnell. And Trump is simultaneously, and there's a Political story about this just last night, saying Trump is comfortable attacking McConnell because he wants to position himself as removed from Congress and removed from the swamp. Yet at the same time, he is backing a key figure. I mean, because McConnell wants Strange because he knows Strange will be a reliable vote for him, and is concerned that...
Which matters if you try to pass health care and you fall 1 vote short. Swapping Luther Strange, who is a reliable vote for McConnell, for someone like a Mo Brooks or a Roy Moore would be one less vote you have in your hip pocket.
Brooks and Moore wouldn't be a Collins or a Murkowski or a McCain. They're more like
they would be a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul.
I mean, you're coming up on tax reform where, in all likelihood, they're going to need, if they have any chance of doing anything going forward, they're going to need some different Democratic votes. They're not going to be able to govern Republican only. Although McConnell is still saying tax reform is going to be reconciliation because they can't trust Democrats. But I'm sure in the back of his mind, it's one of these days, maybe in a month when they got to keep the government open and raise the debt ceiling, they need someone who's going to be willing to accept some bipartisanship, and you can't count on Brooks or Moore to be that person. Trump is siding with McConnell and Strange, so it's beyond me to psychoanalyze it.
Well, that makes perfect sense, though. Again, going back to if Donald Trump wants to pass his health care reform or his tax reform, then he is an ally of Mitch McConnell, right? And he therefore would benefit by having Mitch McConnell have more votes in his hip pocket.
Why is he attacking Mitch McConnell?
And fewer people. Well, okay, that's all PR, right?
Well, what do you get out of that PR? That's why I don't understand. I mean, he's setting up a situation. I mean, let's face it. The odds of passing tax reform and passing infrastructure are below 50%. There's not strong odds here. I mean, I know you said last time we can't totally discount it. It may be, but they're
yeah, but even then, I think I gave it 20%.
You're being the optimist. You're giving it 20%. So if you're Trump, you should be saying to yourself, "This is a hard road. What can I do to make it easier? And what can I do to hedge against the possibility that they can't do it?" So instead, what he's doing is, I'm going to make it harder by humiliating Mitch McConnell, and if they can't do it, I'm going to blame him and make it harder for Republicans to do well in 2018, which is going to make everything harder for him. Just don't get it.
And then, of course, the fact that Mitch McConnell's wife is in his cabinet adds an additional layer of complexity. I don't know, Trump's going to Trump, but going back to this Alabama race specifically, it's interesting because Luther Strange was a very conservative attorney general in the state of Alabama, and he could have positioned himself as a hardcore conservative.
Well, in his own ad, he is.
And he got the seat because of Jeff Sessions, right? So Jeff Sessions,
who got forced out of office.
The governor. So Sessions goes to be Attorney General of the United States. The governor, who's not there anymore,
because he was in a corruption scandal involving his mistress, and there's a question whether Strange was going easy on the governor, and that's why he got the post. So that's part of the drain the swamp message that Moore and Brooks are pushing. That Strange is part of a corrupt Alabama political establishment as well as the national Mitch McConnell Republican establishment.
So, but Strange could have been an outsider, but for some reason he decides to ally himself with McConnell. McConnell's now spending with his super PAC something like $8 million to try to help Strange. Yeah. And now he got Donald
money
Trump
that can be spent on competitive general election seats in 2018.
Yeah,
I mean, everyone knows the map for Democrats is uphill in 2018, but you can't be totally sanguine about keeping control of the Senate. When you got 52, you lose 3, you don't have your position at all. So McConnell is choosing.
But I think it's money well spent. I think it's money well spent if you're McConnell because, number one, Strange is the incumbent, so he's got some advantage. Number two, honestly, if you're McConnell, having a loose cannon Republican that you can't rely on in the Senate is arguably worse than having a Democrat from McConnell's perspective.
But what's one point I want to make about Strange? Strange isn't running ads saying, "Vote for me and my buddy Mitch McConnell." He's running ads saying, "I'm a Trump man. I'm backed by the NRA. I'm backed by National Right to Life. We're going to build the wall." And when Trump had that tweet this week, they quickly pulled out an ad. We're like, half the ad is looking at the tweet on the screen. So
right. And Mo Brooks was critical.
That's right.
Trump
and so the McConnell PAC and Strange have been hammering Brooks for his Trump criticisms in 2016. Even saying, Brooks criticized Trump's immigration plan. Now, Brooks's complaint was that it wasn't conservative enough, that he was going to let too.
Yeah, Brooks is more of like a Ted Cruz kind of guy, right? I mean, and in fact, I think Brooks is endorsed by like Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and those sort of people.
And Brooks has an ad, name checking those folks. But Brooks's complaint that Trump was going to let in too many legal immigrants, that he was going to send them back and then bring them back in, which of course now the current plan is to slash legal immigration. So he's moved to Mo Brooks on that front. But the reason why, and the McConnell people are attacking Roy Moore too, so I don't want to neglect that. And they're
well, they need to, because what happens sometimes in these cases is Strange and Brooks kill each other, and Roy Moore comes up the middle. And this one's going to have a runoff election, right?
That's my point here. So two of them advance. No one's going to get 50%. Two of them are going to advance. What little polling we've seen, and maybe we shouldn't put too much stock in a couple of scanty polls, the conventional wisdom is that Moore got his ticket punched, and the race is between Strange and Brooks for number 2.
And the crazy thing is that it's not absurd to think that Roy Moore could beat Luther Strange.
Right. So,
head-to-head matchup.
And I think that's why the McConnell pack is going after Moore also. They're not waiting to go after him. But their primary concern is to take Brooks out and make sure that Strange makes the runoff. But their attack on...
Now, Mo Brooks...
I'm sorry.
Mo Brooks is at the shooting.
Right.
The Steve Scalise shooting.
Oh, he's milked it. He has an ad where you hear the audio of the shooting. And the text is like, a Bernie Sanders supporter, shot congressman. And then you have, and what did the liberal media have to say? And then you see someone asking Brooks at the site of the shooting, does this make you change your opinion about gun control? And then, Brooks goes on the stump about, we need to protect our Second Amendment freedom. So like in the face of tragedy, Brooks doesn't waver on his belief of the Second Amendment. So some people have felt that was very crass. Scalise's people had some anonymous quotes saying, some people have different opinions about what's appropriate. But Brooks is not playing a timid game in this, although most polls I've seen have him in third place. So it would appear we're likely to have a more Strange runoff. And
it's definitely going to be more strange. Stranger and stranger.
And the McConnell attack on Moore is really weak, just objectively weak. They have an ad saying Moore is financially greedy because he had a nonprofit. So he made all this money as a judge, and he has a nonprofit where he's made $1 million. He had a nonprofit during the very extended interim period where he was not a judge. He wasn't double dipping. He got forced out of being a judge over the Ten Commandments flap. He starts a nonprofit to champion these social conservative causes. He makes $1 million over the course of a 9-year period, so he's not making $1 million a year. They attack him for using that money to have a private jet. They rented a private jet once to go to an event. It wasn't like they own a private jet. So it's all really thin stuff. And you're just not going to shake the bond Moore has with social conservatives. Maybe there's some other class of conservative in Alabama that you could appeal to. But if you're a social conservative in Alabama, man, you love Roy Moore. There is no one who's gone to the mat more than Roy Moore. So
it's possible that Roy Moore will be a U.S. senator.
It is totally possible.
Is the primary this coming Tuesday?
The primary is coming Tuesday. Well, the initial primary is coming Tuesday. I forget when the runoff would be.
And in September, I think. Don't quote me.
And then you have a general in November, I believe. So there will be a Democrat, and you might say there's no way a Democrat can win this race, and that's probably true. But the two top people on the Democratic side is a guy named Doug Jones, who is a prosecutor, and he prosecuted the infamous Birmingham church bombing that a white supremacist did that killed children in the 60s. The prosecutions happened, decades later, and so he's running on his record as a fighter for social justice. And as a prosecutor, I mean, he's a good speaker. He knows how to deliver a presentation. There's a person on the ballot whose name is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And when he filed, the local Democrats said, "We don't know who this guy is." Some people thought, "Is it really Robert F. Kennedy Jr.?" Which is not. There was some speculation. Well, this is some kind of Republican ploy to pick some random guy who's going to undercut our legitimate candidate and run a half-ass campaign, and the Republican wins going away. But you can go to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s website. He's got a real website. He doesn't have TV ads, but he does have YouTube videos, and so you can hear him speak. You can hear his radio interviews. He's pretty good. I mean, he is.
He's a real guy. He is not.
Real guy
he's not the son of the former senator.
He's not related
Robert.
to the political candidates, but he's a vet. I think he's a Marine. He has well-articulated views on the issues of the day. I wouldn't say he's right-leaning, but he definitely mixes in some moderate views with standard Democratic progressivism, and he talks about bipartisanship. If it is Roy Moore, I mean, I don't want to claim I'm an expert in Alabama politics. It may be that Roy Moore is a lock because there are enough Alabama social conservatives to make it impossible for anybody to go up the middle. But I would not assume you'd at least want to see that play out a little bit, whether it's Doug Jones or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You want to see it play out and see, hey, can either of these guys find a moderate vote in Alabama who know the state well enough to find if does that vote exist and make this a race?
Well, I think what'll be interesting is if there's a runoff, as we now believe there will be a runoff, and likely between Roy Moore and Luther Strange, does Trump do anything else? Like, this is a Senate seat, and if you're McConnell and Trump, it's just as important as North Dakota or Ohio, or you know what I mean? Like, keeping Luther Strange in there as a guy who's going to basically rubber stamp the Trump agenda without asking a lot of questions. I'm not trying to attack Luther, but I'm just saying he's a reliable McConnell-Trump vote on the big tax reform, health. If McConnell needs the vote, he'll be there. Having that vote in Alabama is just as important as picking one up from Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, or picking one up from Sherrod Brown in Ohio, or whatever the seat is. So, I mean, like, does Trump go all in? You know, I mean, Trump is presumably very popular in Alabama. Could Jeff Sessions, that probably wouldn't be appropriate for him. I don't know. Like, I mean, how many do they pull out all the stops to keep Luther in there?
I mean, if Trump is mercurial, so we could do logically inconsistent things. If you're going to enter into the first stage of the primary, why wouldn't you enter into the second stage? You know, what's the point of like endorsing Strange now and then undercutting him by saying something halfway decent about Roy Moore? I mean, that would just that would sort of undercut Strange if you did that.
Well, Mike Pence did that, and it worked out for him.
I grant you. Weird things can happen. But I would assume if you're in, you're in. I don't know if Sessions would weigh in, because
no, I think of it from Trump's standpoint. If there's polling that shows that Roy Moore might win, it would be embarrassing for Trump to really campaign hard for Luther and then lose.
Well, that's right for not getting in the first place. It's Alabama. It's a Republican seat. Everyone's running as Trump lovers. I mean, even Mo Brooks, who is the most critical about Trump, still runs as a guy who agrees with Trump's agenda. Well, if you watch some of his more recent ads, the end is, I support President Trump's, and there's a pause, and he says, agenda. He couldn't quite say, I support President Trump. So I support President Trump's agenda. But they're all trying to align themselves with Trump. So Trump shouldn't assume that he can't work with any of them. It's McConnell who's the one who's twitchy about it. But Trump has chosen to get involved. So,
but if Mo Brooks, I mean, I actually think that it'd be easier to work with Roy Moore, as much as he's probably crazier. I think it would be easier to work with Roy Moore and to co-opt him than to work with Mo Brooks. Mo Brooks would probably be, this healthcare bill isn't conservative enough,
Right.
So maybe that's part of the reason that they're trying to, that they're taking out Brooks. I mean, Brooks is presumably like principled. He's a constitutional conservative. And that's a problem if you're trying to like make sausage, right? When you got some guy going, this sausage is dirty, this sausage isn't clean enough. It's like we're making sausage. You know.
Let me segue to some self-promotion.
Shameless.
So I mentioned that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in Alabama is a veteran. If he got the nomination, he'd be the only Democratic veteran running. In fact, the New York Times did a piece last month that already 20 Democratic veterans have announced runs for Congress, and then more on the way. And one of the big viral videos in the past several days has been the Amy McGrath video, who is a fighter pilot, had several bombing runs in Iraq and Afghanistan. She has a fantastic, she's running in the Kentucky 6th against Congressman Andy Barr, where she talks about how she wanted to be a fighter pilot so badly as a kid. She wrote to members of Congress to change the law so she could, and she mostly got rejections or was ignored. In the case of Mitch McConnell, she calls out Mitch McConnell by name, someone who didn't bother to respond to her, but she perseveres and becomes, a groundbreaking female fighter pilot. Google memo notwithstanding. So this ad gets 1 million YouTube views. It's twice as many views as the Iron Stash viral video from Randy Bryce in Wisconsin. She gets, I think $200,000 in 36 hours from online donations. So this is making a lot of Democrats feel like, hey, we're recruiting these great candidates, and we're kicking ass here. So I did a piece for Politico about this trend of Democratic veterans running for Congress.
This is your Google memo, by the way.
Yeah, right. I'll get fired from somewhere, I'm sure.
Speak truth to power.
So it's not new for Democrats to run a robust slate of veterans for Congress. There were 54 veterans that ran in 2014 who were Democrats who were nominated, 42 in 2016, and in each 2014, 2016, the number of veterans that took a Republican-held seat was 0. The only Democrats that won, and there were 3 in each of those years, replaced other Democrats. There are 12 Democrats now in Trump-won districts. Only 2 of them are veterans, and both of them won. The most recent was Tim Walz, who won in the 2006 Democratic wave, and now he's running for governor. So who knows if they would even keep that seat. And the other one's Colin Peterson in rural Minnesota, who won in the 90s. Other people who were in Trump-held seats are attorneys. There's a social worker. There's people who are regular politicians. Being a veteran has not been magic for poaching Republican-held seats. Now, people remember, people who were really steeped in Democratic congressional history, 2006 was the year of the Fighting Dems. They were branded the Fighting Dems. There are 49 veterans that ran that year, and they gave Democrats rhetorically the ability to say, we're against the Iraq War, and it doesn't mean that we're anti-American. Look at all these veterans that are fighting on our side here. So they brought value in that way. But only 5 of them won their races. 4 of them beat Republicans. But a lot of those folks didn't stick around. They won some tough seats, but they couldn't hold it. So 2008, you had 4 veterans that won. 2 of them lost re-elections in 2010, and a third one resigned over sexual harassment allegations. So there's just nothing that says veterans it's not that veterans are bad candidates. In fact, there's some academic research says that all things being equal, they're better than the average candidate. But they haven't proven to give Democrats a strong edge in the districts where they need them. There may be purple districts where they would run well, but there's only so many purple districts left. Most of the red districts are deep red, and in the deep red districts they haven't been any help at all. This was posted at Politico earlier this week. I got a bunch of reaction, which was, how dare you impugn the sanctity of veterans. And other folks who are Democratic veteran organizers saying, look, he's got a point. You can't just parachute a veteran in. Run for city council. Build a political base. Show your breadth of knowledge on the issues. It's not going to be done on biography. And to make one last point before I cede the floor, you certainly say, what's the harm? These are tough races anyway. You might as well run a veteran in there, all things being equal. That's true. But a McGrath video in Kentucky, and also Randy Bryce in Wisconsin, he wasn't pushing the veteran angle, but apparently they will in a subsequent ad. They've said they will because he is an Army vet. He's running against Speaker Paul Ryan. She's running in Kentucky. These are not races listed as competitive races by Cook Political Report and by Nathan Gonzalez, who are the main political handicappers right now. You could argue that these might be reach things that Democrats could get. Paul Ryan's district isn't that Republican. Obama won in 2008. Nate Coe at the Times was in my Twitter feed after I wrote this saying, Rand Paul didn't win the Kentucky 6th in 2016. Lexington's there. The mayor there is a Democrat, and he might run for this seat. Maybe the Democrats can't write the district off. Fine. You can't tell me that it makes sense for the Netroots small donor army to be activated to pour the majority of their resources in two races, which are at best reaches.
Is that happening?
When you have to win.
Is that happening?
Well, Bryce, I think, is coming up on $1 million from Netroots donations. I know McGrath got $200,000 in the first 36 hours. We've already experienced the John Ossoff bubble. And look, Ossoff ran a respectable race. I mean, you could totally argue that it was worth trying in that race. It was close. It probably wasn't worth $23 million close. And that is, and this is sort of brought a point about relying on small donors. Everyone wants to say we don't want big money. It's small donors, people power, yada, yada, yada. Small donors chase shiny objects. Cool video. Daily Kos said, hey, Georgia's winnable. Let's give this a shot. Boom, everyone rushes in. You're not spreading your resources. You're not spreading the field when you do that. Everyone wants to bag on the DCCC because they're party establishment. They don't take risks and they don't have 50-state strategy. But they move their money around to play the field at the most winnable races. And a small donor strategy is just not going to do that because it's too exciting to see someone landed an aircraft carrier, a fighter jet, an aircraft carrier. Man, that's so cool. Maybe we can win Kentucky. That's not good decision making. But when you're dealing with the internet mass, there's no adult supervision there. And so
I share your concerns about the masses.
And so Democrats, for the most part, this is not the party pushing the small donor strategy. That's not really their bailiwick. But they are pushing the veteran angle, and it runs the risk of feeding into that, where you're diverting resources into races that are far from the most winnable.
I like it. Send your hate emails to Bill Scher. Hopefully, the comment section on this dialogue will will bring fire and fury like the comment section has never seen before, aimed at you instead of me.
It's amazing how many veterans are Republican congresspeople. There's an enormous percentage of the Republican class that are veterans. And the Democrats, despite trying, they've really tried. They run 40, 50 pretty much every cycle. There's only 18 veterans who are Democrats in the House now, and only 8 of them that have been elected since 2006. The only Democrat, the most recent Democrat who was a veteran to beat a Republican was Tammy Duckworth, who beat Joe Walsh, who was insane, and who was attacking Duckworth for talking about her service so much. That was in 2012, and then she went on to beat Mark Kirk for the Senate in the 2016 Senate race. So she's the last one to do it. People talk about Jason Kander. Jason Kander ran a respectable race, but number one, he still lost, and number two, he was Attorney General first. He walked up. He didn't just jump in. I'm a vet. Vote for me. He built up a political base first, which a organizer at Common Defense mentioned to me on Twitter the other day. So I want to give him a shout outs. I neglected that point in the piece, but it's an important point. I mean, run for city council for Pete's sake. Get your feet wet. Don't just jump in for House and Senate if you really want to make this happen. Because as a bio element, it's great. It's just not sufficient. It's far from sufficient.
Yep, that makes sense. Why not learn the ropes a little bit, before getting in there? You wouldn't open a restaurant if you'd never worked in one.
Is there a Republican parallel? Is there a prototype of a candidate that grabs the attention of the conservative netroots at the expense of, duller, more
I don't think now there was. If you were there was a time a decade ago, like if you were an African American conservative, you could raise a ton of money, like small dollar money, and it didn't, regardless of your whether or not you were experienced or not.
Alan West, J.C. Watts.
Yeah, and it happened also at the state. There was an analogous, or at the state, people who ran for Congress who you never even heard of. Let's say.
So are we done with that now? Have conservatives given up? I
don't think it's as big as it used to be. I think the Trump era has actually, I'm not sure why, but somehow I think the Trump era, it used to be and I'm gonna this is also fraught with danger to go here, but I think it used to be, there was a time when conservatives were very we want to prove that we're not racist, and therefore if we see someone who's like a hardcore conservative who's African American, we're gonna support them. It's just sort of an affirmative action. We're gonna support them really, whether or not in some cases maybe over somebody who is more qualified. So you have, I'll just give you an example. So my wife many years ago, worked for a guy who was in Utah, a conservative fighter in the Utah state legislature, just a kind of a boring white guy in Utah. He lost to Mia Love, who's now, she ended up losing that race too, I think.
Right.
But she was, black, conservative, and I think a lot of voters were more into that. She was charismatic, very good, versus this kind of boring white guy who had paid his dues. He'd worked in this, he'd gotten a lot of stuff passed in the state legislature. I think in the Trump era that doesn't exist anymore, and I think it doesn't exist as much. And I think it's more now. There's an attitude that's basically we're just going to do what we're going to. We don't care what people think. We're going to do things our way. We're tired of pandering, So anyway, maybe there's a think piece there to be written by somebody. But I don't see the phenomenon as much as I used to.
Very interesting. Probably should leave it on that note, sir.
Do we need to burn the tapes? Did I say?
Well, you're not getting hired by Google anytime soon. I know that much.
Again, rain down fire and fury in the comment section on Bill Scher for his anti-veteran stance is the only way I would describe it. All right.
Till next week, sir.
All right, man. See you guys.
Bye-bye.